Hello everyone, today we're going way back, we're going way back to Genesis. We're going to talk about Adam and Eve, we're going to talk about the real hidden codified message within Adam and Eve. Hello everyone, we've all heard it, Adam and Eve. You know, I heard a funny joke yesterday saying, by a religious zealot saying, God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, and that was his sort of argument against gay marriage. And of course, if it rhymes, it must be true. But we all know the proto-man, proto-woman, and it's quite interesting. Adam and Eve is a story that's actually been changed and manipulated over time in order to serve men. In fact, the original translations of the Bible showed that, as an example, man and woman were made out of dust, and that was and then that was changed into man was made first, and then women were made out of his rib, because it helps in a way to explain why women can't be at the same level as men. But the reality is the original text talked about men and women being created equal, which would have been nice if we would have kept that perspective a few thousand years longer. And why it's important is because a lot of those hidden and codified messages have been removed from Adam and Eve. But Adam and Eve, it doesn't mean that story is not important. It doesn't mean that story is not magical. Because I'm here to tell you it is, especially if we understand the codified and original message of the proto-man Adam and the proto-woman Eve. So as always, I'm going to begin with a quote. And that quote is, "She remembered the story from her childhood about Adam and Eve in the garden and the talking snake. Even as a little girl," she said, to the consternation of her family, "what kind of idiot was Eve to believe a snake?" But now she understood. She had heard of the voice of the snake and had watched the wise and powerful man had fallen under its spell. Eat the fruit and you can have the desires of your heart. It's not evil, it's noble and good. You'll be praised for it, and it's also delicious. So, for those who may not be super familiar with Adam and Eve, very basic story. God puts his creations into this plentiful, wonderful, resource-bound area with animals, and they're all hanging out, and lions are hanging out with sheep, and it's all beautiful, it's all lovely. And then one day, the ego, codified as a snake, serpent, comes down and starts jibber-jabbing. The voice, the voice in our head, the jibber-jabber. That's, the great thing about that quote is, why would a snake talk? Snakes don't talk. This is a codified message. The jibber-jabber in her head. Eve gets a thought. She takes action on the thought, she bites on the fruit, God's angry, and he punishes us, and we leave Eden. So we leave that great place. It's a pretty straightforward story, it's a bit more complex than that. Now, this first part of the retelling of the codified story comes from my friend Alex, who looked into this and came up with a Satori moment, a moment of insight. And basically, the first part of the story is explained by Alex in this way. The garden had enough to go around. Remember, when the garden was created by God, we all had enough to go around. It was fine. Everything was fantastic. Resources made themselves available when needed. Whenever you needed something, it was there. It was a land of abundance. This concept of abundance, not having to take or steal, but it just being there. And this includes not only natural resources, but emotional resources. So for example, people had all the empathy, all the compassion needed to deal with emotional or resourceful issues. And everything was done with each other in mind. For example, the bananas on the tree were created for the monkeys, and the monkeys would eat them, and the seeds in the trees were created for the birds, and the birds would eat them and then spread the seeds, and that would help. And everything in the ecosystem was symbiotic. Now, obviously, the idea of taking something from the Garden of Eden that wasn't yours, from the Tree of Knowledge, is the first selfish act that was apparent. And that was what started to break down the system. When I heard Alex say this, I said, "Mate, write this down." I remember I think we were just chilling out, having a swim. I said, "Nope, don't talk to me about this anymore, let's write it down." I think it's a brilliant insight. And I thought about Adam and Eve a bit more after that. And I thought about, well, hold on, what about the rest of the story? Let's think about the codified message and the rest of the story. Now, like I said earlier, snakes don't talk. We both get that. Us watching the videos we both get that. So what was talking? I believe that the snake was the ego. It was the consciousness that was telling Eve to do something. Now, like we all know, you don't have to take actions on thoughts. We're 340 videos through now. We know that thoughts aren't ours. We don't need to trip on them and act on them every single time. But what happened was, and this is what I think the codified message is that before eating the apple, we were just like the monkeys and our animal brothers and all this sort of gear, that we were just unconscious beings. You don't see dogs sitting around, really worrying about, whether they're going to find any places to walk tomorrow. We were like them, we were unconscious. And then we're tempted to leave this animal world with the forbidden fruit of the tree. Forbidden fruit of the tree was consciousness. And our first experience about becoming conscious was that thought, take what's not yours, take what's not needed, take it before it's needed, right? To take, like Alex said about the resources, taking and not giving. So Eve was to take the fruit of knowledge, that's what it's called in the Bible, and took a bite. That bite was taking action on the thought. And Eve became conscious. Now, when you become conscious, or self-conscious, more importantly in this respect, you lose global consciousness, you lose animal kingdom consciousness, you lose world consciousness, you lose God consciousness, you start freaking out. You're like, oh my God, I'm a person, I'm important, I'm way more important than this tree or this because I'm the center of the universe. As soon as we became self-conscious, you know what we did? Put fig leaves over our genitals and over Eve's boobies, if you believe the artwork, because now they're freaking out. They're like, what's with these boobies? What's with this? Because you can see what taking from the Garden of Eden had done. It made us self-conscious. We started looking at our animals and saying, well, they're not conscious, so we can eat them and kill them and hurt them and test them and put makeup. Revlon can put some makeup on them to see if it works. Now, that created shame. We became ashamed of ourselves. As we aged, we became ashamed of ourselves. As we looked at people and we judged them, became ashamed. And that's sin, the rejection of nature. We felt so disconnected from God. We were evicted from the Garden of Eden, and we talk about getting evicted, so we had to leave. We had to leave the animal kingdom, and we had to build societies, structures, and cities. We needed to be together, and we need to create our own cultures in order to deal with the fact we're so disconnected from God. And that's what the story is trying to tell us, is that this concept of consciousness needs to be a unified global conscious. The ego, the snake that's always telling you what to do, get the apple, do this, don't listen to that, do it for this, that is the snake, that's the temptation. As humans, our burden and original sin, which we're born with, the concept of Christianity's original sin, is the fact that from the minute we're born, then we can understand we've got that voice telling us what to do, and that's original sin. And sin is when we do things outside of our true nature. Our true nature is love, connection, Garden of Eden, absolute abundance, sharing emotionally, connectivity, and including resources with others. And every time we don't do that, we sin against God, we sin against the global system that was created to nurture us and to help us. That's what that story means. For all these, pork chops walking around, not pork chops, for all these reflections of us through society who haven't quite got it yet, we're using this Adam and Eve story, beautiful story, to attack others. They're reading it at face value. We need to go back to the codified message, and the proto-man Adam and the proto-man Eve, we need to have sympathy for them, because they were the first ones to become conscious, to become aware of their bodies, to become aware that they were once separate and different. And ever since then, we've been struggling to get back. We can do it. Every time you meditate, every time you are compassionate, every time you leave yourself to be selfless and help someone else selfless, you become one again with the universal consciousness. That's the Garden of Eden. That's where we're trying to get to. And just like Jesus would say, the kingdom can be here on earth, and you can bring God's kingdom here. We can do that. We can do that through just being selfless and compassionate. Great story. If you hear it or read it, maybe throw this at someone who tries to use it in a different perspective and get their thoughts. I can't wait to see you tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.